There was a time when Hollywood didn't have HR departments, no intimacy coordinators, no compliance officers, no corporate oversight, just ambition, ego, and chaos. This was the lawless era of cinema, when films didn't just break rules. They forced the industry to invent new ones, and some of them were so disturbing, they were banned, burned, or buried for decades. Today, you'll see the 19 most lawless films ever made. Let's open the vault. 19. Faces of Death, 1978. This wasn't a movie, it was a dare. Faces of Death arrived at the end of the 70s, pretending to be a documentary. It claimed to show real footage of people dying, executions, accidents, autopsies, animal slaughter. The marketing pushed one message: this is real, and audiences believed it. Some scenes were staged, some were not. That ambiguity was the weapon, yet viewers walked into theaters unsure whether they were watching cinema or actual death captured on tape. The film was banned in over 40 countries. Video stores kept it under the counter. Bootleg copies circulated like contraband. Parents warned their kids about it the way they warned them about drugs. Critics called it exploitation. Moral watchdogs called it corruption. But it made millions. Because it tapped into something primitive: the forbidden urge to look when you're not supposed to. Today, this concept wouldn't shock anyone. The internet is full of uncensored horror. But in 1978, this crossed a line that mainstream cinema had never approached. It wasn't storytelling. It was voyeurism packaged as entertainment, and it proved something terrifying. Audiences would pay to watch reality bleed. Sheba, A Pink Flamingos, 1972. Before shock marketing was a strategy, John Waters turned it into a weapon. Pink Flamingos wasn't trying to offend critics. It was trying to offend everyone. Shot for around $12,000, starring drag icon Divine, the film proudly advertised itself as an exercise in poor taste. That wasn't irony. It was a challenge. Incest, exhibitionism, kidnapping, cannibalism. And then the final scene, unsimulated, undeniable, designed purely to disgust the audience beyond recovery. Theaters refused to screen it. Cities tried to ban it. Police raided midnight showings. Moral groups demanded it be destroyed. And it became a cult phenomenon. Because Waters understood something most directors didn't. Outrage creates loyalty. This wasn't about narrative structure or cinematic beauty. It was about testing how far an audience could be pushed before they walked out. Modern studios wouldn't touch this, not because it's illegal, but because it's unmarketable. Algorithms don't reward deliberate filth. But in the underground cinema circuit of the 70s, this was punk rock before punk had a name. It proved there was a paying audience for the grotesque. And that taste is completely subjective. 17. Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, 1986. Most serial killer movies turn murder into myth. Henry turned it into routine. Shot for almost nothing on grainy 16mm film, this wasn't stylized horror. It felt like surveillance footage. Cold apartments, cheap furniture, random victims, no music to guide your emotions. Michael Rooker plays Henry like a man discussing grocery lists. No speeches, no dramatic backstory. Just flat, mechanical violence. And that's what terrified censors. The home invasion scene doesn't cut away. It doesn't sensationalize. It just observes. The MPAA panicked. They slapped it with an X rating, not for gore, but for tone. It felt too real, too casual, like it was documenting evil instead of condemning it. For years, it struggled to get distribution. When it finally released, critics were divided. Some called it responsible, and that emptiness was harder to watch than any blood. 16. The Devils, 1971. This is the film Warner Brothers still pretends doesn't exist. Directed by Ken Russell, The Devils tells the story of a 17th century priest accused of witchcraft in a town consumed by hysteria. But this wasn't a quiet historical drama. It was political dynamite. Religious institutions are portrayed as corrupt. Power is shown as theatrical manipulation. And then comes the infamous Rape of Christ sequence, Nuns in a mass frenzy, desecrating religious symbols in a scene so provocative it triggered international outrage. The Vatican condemned it. Countries banned it. Warner Brothers permanently censored it. To this day, the fully uncut version has never received an official wide release. That's almost unheard of. Studios cut films for ratings. Why they don't bury them for 50 years? What made it so dangerous wasn't just the sexual imagery, it was the accusation. The film suggests mass hysteria isn't madness, it's engineered. That religion can be weaponized. That morality can be staged. In the 1970s, that was explosive. Today, it would ignite social media war within hours. The Devils wasn't just controversial, it was blasphemy with a studio logo attached. And the studio still hasn't forgiven it. 15. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. Nothing in cinema felt this real in 1974. Tobe Hooper didn't make a slasher movie. He made a nightmare dressed like reality. Shot on an $80,000 budget in abandoned Texas backroads with untrained actors, the film's horror came from authenticity. Leatherface's mask? Real, human skin-looking props. The stench of decaying sets? Genuine. Saw because Hooper used old meat. Actors weren't protected. Marilyn Burns later admitted vomiting, fainting, and panic attacks were constant. The chainsaw noises were live. No ADR to soften the terror. Audiences weren't ready. Some walked out screaming. The MPAA debated giving it an X rating. Some towns outright banned screenings. But it made millions. What made it truly lawless? The film didn't explain itself. The killings weren't stylized. There was no moral hero. Evil wasn't punished neatly. The family wasn't caricatured. It was horrifyingly human, terrifyingly plausible. Today, a production like this wouldn't survive a single insurance check. OSHA would shut it down. Studios would never risk actors' lives on a thrift store budget. Hooper proved you didn't need CGI or gore porn to terrify people. Just relentless realism, chaos, and a disregard for every safety rule in the book. This is the movie that made slasher a genre and showed Hollywood how far audiences could be pushed and still pay to scream. 14. The Exorcist, 1973. Some films terrify with monsters. The Exorcist terrified with reality. William Friedkin's adaptation of Blatty's novel didn't just show possession, it lived it. Sets were haunted by exhaustion, illness, and real fear. Linda Blair's demonic contortions were aided by mechanical rigs that malfunctioned, sometimes injuring her. Crew members suffered broken bones, frostbite, and cardiac episodes. Legend says some exorcisms actually happened on set. Audiences fainted in theaters. Pregnancies ended in panic. Priests were called to bless screenings. The production was cursed, or at least it felt like it. Fires broke out on set. Sun crew morale collapsed repeatedly. Friedkin's obsession with authenticity turned the filming process into psychological warfare. He shouted, threatened, and pushed actors to their limits. Modern unions would never allow such abuse. Intimacy coordinators, stunt safety, and liability insurance would terminate the project before the first shot. But that chaos gave the movie its power. Every scream, every projectile vomit, every contorted face felt unsimulated. It wasn't just a horror film, it was a public event. And it redefined the limits of what an audience could endure in a theater. The Exorcist proved Hollywood could terrify without cheap jump scares. It demanded real suffering, on screen and off. And that's why no studio could make it today with the same intensity. 13. Cannibal Holocaust, 1980. Rugged, brutal, infamous. In Cannibal Holocaust didn't just test boundaries, it obliterated them. Ruggero Deodato filmed in the Amazon with real indigenous tribes, real animal killings, and actors terrified into authenticity. Several actors vanished after filming, sparking legal investigations that accused Deodato of murder. He had to prove in court that the deaths were staged. The movie's gore was unmatched. Decapitations, dismemberments, and unsimulated deaths of animals. It was labeled a snuff film by authorities. Many countries banned it outright. Some still restrict it today. Its narrative, framed as recovered footage, blurred lines between fiction and reality. Audiences weren't just watching a story, they were complicit voyeurs in unimaginable violence. Deodato weaponized ambiguity. That moral discomfort became the movie's engine, while modern studios would never touch this. Animal cruelty laws alone would halt production. Safety regulations, insurance, and ethical oversight make anything like this impossible today. Yet, its influence lingers in found footage horror, extreme cinema, and underground shock culture. Cannibal Holocaust is not a film to enjoy, it's a film to survive. It reminds us how far filmmakers once went and how far society has since pulled the reins on cinematic lawlessness. It's savage, unforgettable, and illegal in most ways that matter. 12. The BBC banned version. Scum, 1979. If you think School was cruel, you haven't seen Scum. Alan Clarke's vision of Britain's borstal system was so unflinching that the BBC refused to air it. It was remade for cinema, even harsher than the original, and it didn't flinch once. No cuts, no sugar. Or every beat of bullying, humiliation, and sadistic authority played out in real time. Ray Winstone, as Carlin, begins as prey and slowly hardens into predator because submission offered no protection. The greenhouse scene remains one of the most excruciating sequences in British cinema. Fixed camera, no edits, forcing viewers to endure every brutal second. Actors weren't shielded. Scenes were repeated to capture authentic reactions, blurring the line between acting and trauma. Critics called it cruel, some called it fascist. Modern studios wouldn't allow this. Any moment of unsimulated violence or emotional terror would trigger unions, insurers, and social media outrage before the cameras rolled. Intimacy coordinators, mental health checks, risk assessments, Scum ignored them all. But the film survives today as a historical document of institutional cruelty, a window into a world that modern cinema can only reconstruct, not replicate. Scum isn't entertainment, it's memory, and it's one of the most disturbing films ever made. 11. Caligula, 1979. Caligula is not one film, it is three colliding nightmares. Originally conceived as a political satire by Gore Vidal, Tinto Brass attempted an art house historical drama, and Penthouse producer Bob Guccione hijacked the footage to insert hardcore pornography without the cast's consent. The result? A chaotic Frankenstein of art, sex, and scandal that defies classification. Malcolm McDowell delivers Shakespearean-level acting beside unsimulated sex scenes that feel pasted in. The production was lawless. Actors weren't warned about what was being inserted. Editors stitched explicit content behind the backs of everyone involved. Studios today would shut this down immediately. Liability, actor consent, and modern laws make anything like it impossible. Even restorations remain controversial. The ultimate cut rebuilt the film entirely from wreckage, costing $18 million, yet it still feels cheap and expensive at once. Critics hated it. Cast members were horrified. And yet, Caligula has become legendary, proof of what happens when ego, money, and no oversight collide. It's shocking, morally ambiguous, and unrepeatable. Modern cinema fears this kind of lawlessness, and that's exactly why we remember it. 10. Last Tango in Paris, 1972. Bernardo Bertolucci didn't make a movie. He orchestrated trauma. Marlon Brando and Maria Schneider were supposed to act, but Bertolucci went further, and he conspired to provoke a genuine reaction during the infamous butter scene. Schneider, just 19, was humiliated on camera. Brando, too, admitted he felt violated by the process. The result? A scene that is raw, shocking, and unforgettable, but morally indefensible. Critics condemned it as assault disguised as art. Italian courts even sentenced Bertolucci and demanded copies be burned. What makes this film lawless isn't just the content, it's the production, the lack of consent, the manipulation of actors' psychology to elicit authenticity. Modern intimacy coordinators exist precisely to prevent this. Today, Last Tango could never be made. Yet it's a masterpiece of raw emotion, Pain, shame, and desire are captured with a brutal honesty no scripted performance could replicate. It forces audiences to separate art from abuse. And that test, that moral discomfort, is why Last Tango in Paris remains one of the hardest films to watch in cinematic history. 9. The Hills Have Eyes, 1977. Wes Craven didn't just make a horror movie, he made a lawless survival nightmare. Filmed in the scorching Nevada desert on a shoestring budget, The Hills Have Eyes pushed both actors and crew to the brink. Supplies ran low, temperatures soared, and cast members endured real dehydration and exhaustion to capture authenticity. The desert landscape became a character itself, relentless, unforgiving, and punishing anyone unprepared. Craven's vision was brutal. A suburban family stranded in the wasteland faces a gang of cannibalistic mutants. There's no heroism, no neat morality, only survival. The violence feels raw because it's grounded in reality. Real panic, real danger, and real fear. Modern studios could never make this. OSHA, unions, and insurance protocols would shut down a desert shoot like this immediately. But Craven exploited lawlessness to craft terror that lingers. The film doesn't just scare. It forces audiences to feel the hopelessness, isolation, and brutality the characters endure. The Hills Have Eyes is the lawless wilderness of cinema itself, a production as extreme as the story it tells. 8. The Night Porter, 1974. Liliana Cavani turned trauma into cinema and pushed morality to its breaking point. In The Night Porter, a Holocaust survivor reunites with her former Nazi tormentor, not to seek justice, but to resume a sadomasochistic affair. Charlotte Rampling isn't a passive victim. She wields her gaze as a weapon, negotiating power in darkness. The film is stylish, almost hypnotic, but the reality behind it makes it unbearable. Dirk Bogarde, who played the Nazi, was a former intelligence officer who had witnessed concentration camp horrors firsthand. Watching a man with those memories act as a sexual predator feels like a violation of nature. The backlash was immediate. Critics labeled it obscene. Prosecutors in Italy confiscated prints. Roger Ebert called it despicable. Yet Cavani's choice to tell the story from a woman's perspective forced audiences to confront the uncomfortable truth. Trauma doesn't end with liberation. It lingers in private, dangerous spaces. Modern studios would never greenlight this. Any production depicting sexualized abuse of real historical trauma would be stopped by lawyers, ethics boards, and advocacy groups before the first scene. The Night Porter exists as a cinematic relic. Beautiful, horrifying, and unreplicable. It's one of the rare films that forces viewers to examine their own complicity in watching pain unfold. 7. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978. I Spit on Your Grave is not subtle. It doesn't ask for sympathy or understanding. It weaponizes duration and discomfort. The first half is a relentless, uncut assault on the protagonist. Camille Keaton's character endures every second of brutality with no cinematic relief. No cuts, no music, no heroic rescue. The violence is methodical, calculated, and almost impossible to watch. Then comes the second half, revenge. Every tormentor experiences the exact same pain inflicted on the heroine. The structure is mathematical. The message is brutal. Vengeance is justice in a world that allowed such atrocity, and critics condemned it. Roger Ebert called it a vile bag of garbage. Home video boards banned it. Modern studios would never release this. The NC-17 rating alone makes it commercially dead. Advertising would be impossible. Streaming platforms would bury it. But its legacy is undeniable. It tapped into primal rage, forcing audiences to face the darkest impulses of survival and retribution. The film blurs the line between exploitation and empowerment, but its lawlessness lies in the audacity to go further than any mainstream cinema had dared before. No producer today would risk the lawsuits, protests, and ethical firestorm that I Spit on Your Grave survived, and that's exactly why it belongs on this countdown. 6. Straw Dogs, 1971. Sam Peckinpah, didn't just film violence, he choreographed it like a military operation. Straw Dogs begins innocuously. A quiet mathematician moves to rural England, but beneath the pastoral facade simmers brutality. Peckinpah's camera observes every act of aggression with cold precision. The infamous home invasion and assault scenes are relentless, unflinching, and terrifyingly methodical. Dustin Hoffman's character slowly transforms. He's the quiet intellectual who rationalizes savagery, proving that the most dangerous man in the room isn't always the obvious thug. The violence is logical, calculated, and disturbingly plausible. The production itself was chaotic. Actress Susan George was pushed to emotional extremes to elicit authentic reactions. Scenes blurred acting and trauma. Critics called it fascist. Audiences were horrified. The UK banned it. Home video censored it for 18 years. Modern cinema could never replicate this. Liability, unions, and ethical oversight make uncut psychological and physical torment impossible today. Peckinpah captured a fleeting moment when films were made first, and consequences came later. Straw Dogs remains one of the most disturbing, morally ambiguous, and technically precise films about violence ever made, and its lawlessness ensured it would haunt the industry forever. 5. A Clockwork Orange, 1971. Like it could exist in today's sanitized Hollywood. 4. The Last House on the Left, 1972. Wes Craven didn't just make horror, he weaponized realism. Shot on a $90,000 micro-budget, The Last House on the Left provoked audiences with unflinching, documentary-style violence. The assault on Mari Collingwood is filmed with a detached eye. No music, no cinematic comfort, no cuts. It's repulsive, almost unbearable. Craven refused to soften the blow, creating a film that looked less like cinema and more like police evidence. The UK banned it for decades. Audiences fainted. Critics called it obscene, yet it became legendary in underground horror circles. The film used duration as a weapon. The first half is relentless victimization. The second half mirrors the pain onto the perpetrators, a mathematical structure of suffering and revenge. Modern studios would never allow this. Any production today would be halted by ethics boards, unions, and ratings authorities before filming began. Intimacy coordinators and legal departments exist precisely to prevent this level of exposure. Craven tapped into something primal, the raw, uncomfortable truth that vengeance can feel just. The Last House on the Left is lawless cinema at its most audacious, a film that survives as a shocking experiment in endurance, morality, and fear. 3. Deliverance, 1972. John Boorman didn't make a survival thriller. He made a psychological and physical endurance test. Filmed chronologically to physically break the actors, Deliverance turned a weekend canoe trip into a nightmare. The exhaustion, fear, and raw emotion seen in the final act are genuine. The turning point, the assault on Ned Beatty, was shocking, taboo, and completely unprecedented for mainstream cinema. Male-on-male sexual violence had never been portrayed so directly, shattering the tough guy myth and leaving audiences unnerved. Actors were put in real danger. Burt Reynolds performed his own waterfall stunt, cracking his tailbone on a submerged rock. Director Boorman admitted the production was reckless. Today, health and safety protocols would make it impossible. Yet the film's lawlessness is what gives it power. It presents civilization stripped away, reducing suburban skills to uselessness. Every scene tests morality, survival, and endurance. Audiences weren't just watching, they were experiencing the terror alongside the characters. Yet Deliverance isn't merely a movie. It's a document of extremity, a product of a time when filmmakers risked everything for authenticity. Modern Hollywood would never allow it, and that's why its legacy still chills viewers nearly 5 decades later. 2. Winter Kills, 1979. This wasn't a film set. It was a crime scene. Winter Kills was financed with marijuana profits. Producers paid the crew in envelopes stuffed with cash. No checks, no oversight. Unions eventually intervened, but by then, chaos had taken hold. One producer went to federal prison. Another was found handcuffed to a bedpost and murdered. The production itself was lethal. The film reflects that madness. Director William Richer captured paranoia bleeding into every frame. The tone sits uncomfortably between Doctor Strange love satire and the Parallax View conspiracy paranoia. Jeff Bridges, John Huston, and even an uncredited Elizabeth Taylor, paid with a mink coat, perform in a world where everyone is bought. Today, corporate compliance tracks every cent. Safety and legal protocols would prevent anything like this. Back then, dirty money built cinema. The industry's lawless past left behind a relic, a movie so unstable, chaotic, and dangerous it could never be made again. Winter Kills isn't just a story. It's proof that when lawlessness meets ambition, reality can outdo fiction. The production itself became part of the film, a true money laundering operation caught on camera. Audiences aren't just watching a movie, they're watching crime unfold. 1. Salò, or The 120 Days of Sodom, 1975. Pier Paolo Pasolini didn't just push boundaries, he annihilated them. Salò strips away narrative, pleasure, and comfort, exposing fascism at its rawest. Human beings are reduced to objects, tortured, humiliated, and cataloged. The camera doesn't flinch. It doesn't cut away. Every moment of degradation plays out fully, forcing viewers to confront moral failure. The production became part of the horror. Pasolini was murdered 3 weeks before release. Prosecutors seized reels. For decades, bans and restrictions turned it into contraband, traded like criminal evidence. Modern studios couldn't touch this. Liability, ratings, ethics boards, and union regulations would immediately halt such a project. There's no team of intimacy coordinators, no insurance policy, or no legal loophole that could allow Salò to exist today. Yet its influence lingers, not as entertainment, but as warning. It shows the extremes of cinematic lawlessness, when filmmakers risk everything, even lives, to capture a truth society doesn't want to see. Salò is unreplicable, unforgiving, and unforgettable. It's the pinnacle of the era when cinema dared to go too far, forcing the industry and audiences to decide what should never be allowed on screen again. These 19 films didn't just break rules, they obliterated them. They pushed actors, crews, and audiences to extremes, blurring art, crime, and morality. Banned, lost, or controversial, modern Hollywood could never risk making them again. Yet their legacy remains, a testament to cinema's lawless past, where chaos and ambition ruled. Subscribe to witness more forbidden stories, see hidden productions and shocking truths from the films that dared to go too far.